Hey folks, this is Goliath from doom3world.org. Today I'm going to be talking about the Quake 4 FX editor. Since Quake 4 was built on and runs on the Doom 3 engine, it makes sense to familiarize ourselves with the new tools that are available to us. So gone is the particle editor, and what we're left with is something called the FX editor. So to launch the FX editor, you're going to need to create a separate shortcut. Here's an example of mine. You have the game path, the executable, allow console 1 so we can pull down the console quickly, set your screen resolution, make sure you run all of the Quake editors in windowed mode, set the mod directory, and the command that starts the FX editor is +editfx. So when you launch that shortcut, you should get something that looks like this. You have your Quake 4 window here, and you also have the Quake 4 FX editor. If this FX editor does not come up, you can launch it from the console just by typing editfx. Now the first thing that you want to do when you want to use the FX editor is to launch a box map, which is what you see here. Now you'll probably notice that my Quake window is kind of frozen. I'm using a timescale command in order to kind of freeze the game whenever I'm not really doing much with it. Timescale commands are also really helpful when you're trying to fine-tune particle effects, because you can slow things down and really get a good look at exactly what's happening. But in this case, I'm slowing it way down, almost like pausing the game so that I'm not wasting frames in the video while I'm sitting here talking and not using the Doom 3 window. Okay. So, once you have your map loaded, go ahead and select a particle from this drop-down list, and I've selected effects/weapon/blaster/trail, and that is, I think, probably the most simple particle effect there is. So we'll start there. It's a good stepping stone. Now, if there's any time where I open up an effect that you don't see in this drop-down list, you can click on the Open button or go to File Open and just go searching for whatever it is that I'm currently looking at. So, for example, if you don't have the blaster trail, the effect weapons blaster trail in your drop-down list, you can go to Base Effects Weapons Blaster and then look for Trail FX. Before we really get rolling, let me go over some key bindings that will make getting around in the editor a lot easier. Probably the most important is Activate Editor, and that will allow you to switch back and forth between the Quake 4 window and whatever current editor you have running. Another really useful key binding is editfx_play, and there are two others, editfx_stop and editfx_play looping. Think of these kind of like VCR buttons. They'll allow you to play, stop, and loop the current effect that you have loaded. If you don't bind those keys, you can still get around. You can still start and stop effects by going to the Tools menu, and you can find play effects, play looping, and stop looping here in the Tools menu. So let's go ahead and take a look at our blaster trail. When you select it from the drop-down list, this segments area is automatically populated. Now our blaster trail only consists of one segment. Okay, with this particle effect, it goes by so quickly that I've actually used a time scale of 0.5, and as you can see, I'm moving at half the speed. So I'm going to play the effect while I'm moving. Hopefully we'll be able to see it. Yeah, you can barely see it. And so that's why there's the nice play looping key. When I press that, and now when I walk over, you can actually see the effect. Without play looping, it'd be kind of hard to see it. Before we go any further, I want to talk about the various elements of the Quake 4 FX editor window. There's the drop-down list that shows all the currently existing effects, and you can cycle through these, and with play looping enabled, it'll actually sort of preview each one. It'll load each one as you go through the list. Then there's the segments window, and with the blaster trail, it's a really simple effect, so it only has one segment. When you get into things like, say, the exploding barrels and things like that, you will have a lot of segments. So let's take a look at the various types that are possible. The blaster trail is made up of a line, but you can also insert sprites, which are 2D images, models, which would be 3D, line, which is what the blaster trail uses here. A linked line, that's sort of like, say, if you wanted to create a spiral, you would create, like I say, one revolution of it, and then you can do a linked line, and it will sort of attach any particular line design you make to the tail of one, or the head of one will be attached to the tail of another, so on. A decal, that's whether or not you want to leave behind a decal with the effects. A sound, whether or not the effects should be synced up with the sound. So, like, say, a bullet impact or something like that. Light, whether or not light should be emitted whenever the effect is played. Debris. Debris is sort of like when you blow up the hover tank, all those chunks that are left behind that react properly to the ground. They bounce around properly on the ground instead of going through the map and things like that. That's what debris is used for. I'm skipping the things that I haven't researched enough to really know all about yet. Vision, there are 3 different options for the vision. Camera shake, like I say, whenever you get hit, oftentimes there's a camera shake associated with that. Tunnel vision and double vision, and delay. Okay, so when you click on a segment, the properties window will populate, and the first thing that is selected is the emitter tab. The emitter is your start point for your particle effect. The first value you can edit under the emitter tab is the start time. And if you want something to be delayed, then you would change this value here from 0. If you want something to start as soon as the effect fires, then you leave it at 0. Count is the number of copies of whatever your effect is. So watch as I increase count. You'll see how the blaster trail gets a lot more opaque. That's because there are several copies. There are 4 copies that are being fired off each time. So I'm going to reduce that back down to 1. Now the next option here is spawn simultaneously. That really isn't useful here since we only have 1 segment, but if we have more than 1 segment, you can either set your segments up so that like one fires and then the other one fires, and they sort of work their way through in serial. But if you use spawn simultaneously, each segment will fire off at the same time. Alright, the next option that's pretty useful is persist particles upon effect stop. Now, this option is really useful for, like, say, we'll take a look at the rail trail at some point, and basically whenever your effect is done, all the particles will disappear. But if you want something to stick around until it's completely done, like say if you have a delay or the duration of a particular segment is longer, than the duration of your actual particle effect, then you can check this box and it will follow through to the end. Okay, so now click on the line tab, and one of the first options here is the lifetime. And right now this whole effect lasts only 0.1 second, but watch as I increase it, say to 0.5, you can see how it slows down and stretches out how long that beam sticks around for. Okay, so now if you watch closely up here, I've changed these values. I've set the minimum lifetime to 0.1. I've unlocked this little padlock here, and I've entered a value of 0.5 for the maximum lifetime. And if you watch the blaster trail, basically Quake 4 will pick a number for the lifetime that's anywhere within that range. And so as you can see, some of these are long, some of them are short, and it just happens at random. Okay, so I'm going to put this back the way it was. There we go. Okay, well, here's where you actually input the material you want to use that will define the look for your line effect. Now, if underneath the image, it gives you a nice little preview of what it looks like. If you click on Tile Material, watch what happens to this segment. And so you can increase and decrease the number of times that the image is tiled. Alright, I'm going to skip the depth effects for now and move on to the Origin tab. Okay, in the Origin tab we have Forward, which I'm going to leave at 0 for now, but it'll be pretty obvious what Forward would do after I show you the others. Look how I have the crosshair lined up with the beam. I'm going to change the left value to something like 50 and press Tab so that the value is saved. And look now that the beam has shifted to the left 50 units. If I do -20, you can see how the beam is now moved to the right 20 units. Move it back to 0, and now we're back to where we started. So it should be pretty obvious what the forward and up do. Basically, you're just changing the origin position. Now, what's really fun is if you unlock these items here and you give a range, then that's one way that you can sort of multiply the number of beams and their starting locations, like so. Okay, so now I've given ranges for my origin, and as you can see, the beam is just all over the place. Now, if I go back to my emitter tab and I increase the count, you can see that I'm getting 4 beams, and they all have just random origin locations, random origins within the range that I specified. Okay, so let's say I want to go back. I want to undo all of my changes up to this point. In other words, I want to revert back to the original blaster trail. Well, if you go to the Edit menu and choose Revert to Original, that will basically lose all of your changes, and now you can see that I'm back to the default blaster trail. Okay, the other options under the Origin tab, there's Distribution, and since we're dealing with a line and we're not dealing with a linked line, spiral won't really be very useful for us. The only time I've seen spiral be handy is when you're using a linked line or some other type. And you can also use a model as your distribution. Now, I haven't really played with that yet, but I think that the model distribution means that you can define your distribution area as sort of a complex or semi-complex 3D model instead of a line or a spiral or a box. You can get a little bit more complicated. Okay, under the Size tab, we have, well, this is pretty self-explanatory. Watch as I increase the size here. Okay, I've slowed down the game to a time scale of 0.2, and I've used no clip to move in really close to this beam so we can get a really good look at it. Okay, so the first thing you see on the Color tab is the start and end values. Think of these sort of like the limits of your color channel. Okay, so throughout the course of this particle effect, it's going to start at a certain color intensity, and then by the end of the particle effect, it will not be visible, because black means that the color channel, think of it in RGB values as 0, 0, 0. I'll come back to that in just a second with another example that might help explain it a little bit better. Underneath, where you set the limits of your color intensity, you have the envelope, and that has a drop-down list with a lot of sort of preset things. And so, like, watch as I change them, watch what happens to the beam here. See how it flickers in completely different ways, depending on what I choose. So let's go back to our linear flicker. Okay. And which you might not be able to see extremely well, but this effect is flickering very slightly and then fading out, a nice smooth fade. Well, to maybe make this a little bit easier to understand, I'm actually going to reverse this. I'm going to set the start as black, which means not visible, and set the end to bright white, which means it will have the diffuse intensity as strong as the actual image, the source image that it's using for its color channel. So I'm going to do that, and now you can see that it sort of fades in when it's doing its flicker, and it fades up to a very strong beam. There, that was a good example right there. Okay, so again I'm going to revert back to the original. So now I should have just my normal beam. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Alright. Okay, also on the Size tab, we have the envelope, and this is where you can sort of map out a variety of size changes throughout the life of your effect. So the default here is just an exponential decrease, but let's change that to something like I don't know, maybe fire table, and you can watch how the size of the effect will kind of grow and shrink according to the table. So here it starts off real small, then it expands right at the end. Play around with it, you'll kind of get the idea. Okay, the last thing I want to look at with the blaster trail is the length tab. Okay, when you have the start values all set at 0 and you have the use end origin checkbox unchecked, the length of your effect will basically be wherever you fire it or wherever it first occurs, and it will that one segment will last until either the effect fades out or it detonates on the like say the end of the world, or in this case a wall over here. In other words, the length of the beam will be the entire length of the room. So like if I were to move the character up to the wall and then test this effect again, the beam would be much shorter. Now if I uncheck the use end origin, it looks like the beam went away, but it really didn't. What happens is the length is 0 because all of these values here are 0. So if I give a forward value of say 50, then there's our beam again, and it stretches from it's 50 units. Now if I open this up to a range, do something like 0 to 50, you can see how the length of the beam each time it is fired will be anywhere between 0 and 50.